Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at Kinetic's 1:48 scale CF-104 Starfighter. This is my favorite Cold War fighter by far, and on top of that it's Canadian, which makes it a little more personal for me because I am obviously Canadian. So let's go ahead and hop into it. This one starts off in the cockpit, as do most kits, and here you can see I already did some modification to the ejection seat. Drilled out those little holes there. Those were weight-saving holes that were drilled out in the framing of the ejection seat to save weight in the aircraft. And in a few minutes you'll see that I realized that I shouldn't have drilled those out because you can't see them anyway. They get covered up by a little section of a kind of the back headrest section. It might be the rails that guide the actual ejection seat in, I'm not too sure. But they get completely covered and there is no way to see them on the finished build. But it's nice to know that it's there anyway. You can see I'm getting the cushion in place. For some reason I painted those sections of the ejection seat first and then glued this stuff on after. I'm pretty sure my thought process was kind of, oh well, this is the only part of the ejection seat that's going to be gray, but it turns out that there are a lot more parts that were supposed to go on than I initially thought. The ejection seat had quite a few parts and it was actually very, very detailed, which is really nice to see. Here's that portion that I was talking about earlier that covers up the stuff that I drilled out. Initially I tried clipping off the bottom of it and just leaving the top headrest part so you can still see the holes in the framing, but those two side pieces are structural support and they have the locating pins to get the ejection seat into the cockpit, so I ended up gluing them back onto the sides after. Just getting the ejection seat all sprayed up now. The color that I used was a USAF medium gray, the model air color by Vallejo. This is the closest match that I currently had at the time of building this kit. So that's what I decided to use, sorry, and it looks pretty good. Here you can see now I'm putting in a blank plastic slab onto the kind of backrest of the ejection seat, and that's because after looking at many reference pictures and actually seeing a CF-104 in person, I noticed that the C2 ejection seat, the Lockheed C2 ejection seat that sat in Canadian Starfighters, normally had a cushion on the back. So I took a piece of backrest from a later variant of ejection seat that comes in the kit and just kind of trimmed it down and used that cube of plastic to create a cushion, and it looks pretty good. Here you can see I'm hitting the headrest with a nice Vallejo red color. This is the RLM-23, I believe. That is one thing that I love about Cold War and like early ejection seats is they all had red headrests. I'm not too sure why. If anybody knows why they all had red headrests, please do let me know. But it adds a nice pop of color to an otherwise pretty bland ejection seat, and it looks very cool. So I was very happy to be able to paint that up. And on the finished model, you can see it extremely well. Here you can see now I'm putting in the photo etch seatbelts. Because it is a Kinetic Gold kit, it actually does come with a very small fret of photo etch, which comes with harnesses and some other things, antenna for the outside, some sections of like the tips of the wings if you choose not to have the tip tanks on, things like that. Here I am painting up the harnesses now. After looking at many reference pictures of the C2 ejection seat, every single one of them had a different harness color. Some of them were khaki, some of them were green, blah. I decided to go for more of a khaki color because that was the color of the harnesses that I saw on the Starfighter in real life. So I took a US Desert Sand color and mixed it with a little bit of black and a little bit of a like an RAF khaki color or British khaki color, and came out looking pretty good. Here I am now hitting the whole ejection seat with a wash. This is just a black, like a generic black wash, and this will just help bring out all of the recessed and raised details on the ejection seat and make it look a little bit more dirty. Similarly to the last build, I didn't end up priming the cockpit and anything before I painted it because I didn't want it to be too faded. On the whole, CF-104 cockpits weren't super dirty and faded, so I just chose to use a bit of an oil wash, and that did the trick just fine. And here is the finished ejection seat. Looks a little bit dirty, but not too dirty, and overall I am very, very happy with how it came out. Moving on to the actual cockpit tub now, it's getting sprayed up in the same USAF medium gray, just a uniform coating over the whole thing, and then I'll go back in after with a paintbrush and a black, and we'll pick out the consoles and different details in the cockpit. Here are the side consoles all painted up, and here is the instrument panel painted up. I didn't record the instrument panel painting just because the kit didn't come with any decals, and I really wanted to focus on getting the paint as neat as possible. Same thing with the switches and everything, so I hope you guys can understand why I didn't record that. It is nice to note as well, like I just said, the kit doesn't come with any decals, but the raised detail is absolutely phenomenal. Like up there with Tamiya, it was really, really nice to see, and with it being so crisp, it is very easy to pick out all the detail. Here I am getting the flight stick in place now. For whatever reason, I had a very, very difficult time getting this in place. As you can see here, it was pretty finicky. In my build videos in 2026, I really want to focus on keeping little clips like this in my videos, just because I find that I edit out every little mistake that I make to cut down a little bit on the runtime of the videos and things like that. But in doing that, I fail to show the human side of myself and the fact that humans are going to make mistakes and it's okay to make mistakes. So in 2026, I want to focus a little more on keeping some of the stuff like that in my videos to show that, you know, I am still human and I do make mistakes. So with my little rant out of the way, we can go ahead and catch up with the build. Here is the finished cockpit. This is hands down one of, if not the best out of the box cockpits I've ever done. It just, the details were super crisp and everything flew together like a box of Lego. It was absolutely phenomenal, and I had a smile on my face the entire time I was building it. Painting up some components for the interior of the aircraft again now. This is the exhaust pipe, I guess you'd call it. If anybody knows the actual name of it, please do let me know. But in real life, it was kind of a rustic brown color, so I just opted for a regular dark earth color because it's not super visible in the end of the build, but I would like to still have that color implied. That way, if somebody walks by and glances a flashlight in there, you still can see it. Moving on to the wheel wells now. The detail in the wheel wells was fantastic. I've got nothing but good things to say about this kit. It was just, I was a little bit kind of blown away, especially with all of that little detail, or all those little bits of detail, and with all of that, the fitment was still fantastic. It was a fantastic kit, and this is 110% not going to be the last F-104 that is on this channel. Anyway, catching up with the build, here I am assembling the wheel wells. The instructions call for a silver color, just silver. But after doing some research about the F-104, or the CF-104 specifically, the later, I don't want to say later variants, but after the CF-104s were repainted into their two-tone camo, even their single-tone camo, instead of being silver, the color in the wheel wells was changed to a kind of dark green color, the same dark green color that was on the outside of the aircraft. Some references said it was silver, some references said it was the dark green, so I personally opted for the dark green just because it provides a nice bit of contrast against the grayish-white belly of the aircraft, and it looked great. Here's that exhaust pipe going in place. There's two locating pins that you have to find, and you can't really see them when you're putting it in place, so you just kind of have to guess, but you'll know when it's in place because it'll stop wiggling around. You can see two big notches there in the fuselage half for the wheel well to go in place, and here is the cockpit tub going in place. At this point now, the fuselage halves are ready to be closed up. A little tiny bit of filler was needed on the front of the spine, right behind the cockpit, but it was sorted in a matter of minutes. It was really not a big deal. At this point in the build now, it's just a lot of cutting pieces off the sprue, sanding them down, then getting them on the aircraft, just building up the general shape. Um, this is always one of my favorite parts of the build, just because you really start to see the shape of the aircraft come together, and you know you're getting closer to painting, which is always exciting. Another thing to note here as well is the kit has the option to have a bunch of stuff open. As shown in the intro, you can have the radome open to reveal the radar. The avionics bay can be opened, and so can the air brakes. I opted to have all of them closed, just to not really affect the very sleek, streamlined look of the Starfighter. But the next time I do a Starfighter on the kit, which will hopefully be very soon, because I absolutely love this kit, and I absolutely love the Starfighter, I'm probably going to try and open everything up just to see what that would look like. Here I am getting the air intakes all built up. This is a 3-piece affair and everything fits great. As you can see, there are some pretty nasty ejector pin marks on the inside there, but on the finished model you really can't see inside the air intakes all that well, so you're not going to notice that they're there at all. Here is the forward housing for the 20mm Vulcan cannon going in place. There you can see there's a little bit of leftover sprue there that I ended up cutting off so I can get that piece in place. It's really interesting. The CF-104 was one of 2 aircraft that Canada operated that was capable of and actively did carry nuclear weapons. The other one obviously being the CF-101 Voodoo. And because of that, it negated the need for a Vulcan in the nose, because the aircraft was used in its early years as a nuclear strike aircraft and a photo reconnaissance aircraft. Toward the end of its career with Canada, probably within the last, I'd say probably the last 15 years or so, the aircraft was used for a more generic ground strike / ground attack role, and the Vulcan was retrofitted back into the aircraft to act as its really its only form of air-to-air defense. With that little history lesson out of the way, we can go ahead and catch up with the build again. Here you can see a kind of an aerodynamic fin that goes in the bottom of the aircraft, similar to what the F-16 has. Just helps with stability at supersonic speeds. And here is the tail hook going in place. This was used in case the aircraft had some sort of a brake failure, or if it was on the ground and they were doing engine run-ups but didn't want the aircraft to move, they'd pop the tail hook down and the aircraft would throttle up after hooking the tail hook into something, and then it obviously wouldn't move. Here are the wings going in place. I opted to have the flaps down, which means that the slats need to be at a slightly downward angle, as you can see here. Very rarely would CF-104s be shut down on the ground with flaps in the lowered position. I just thought it looked cool, so that's what I opted for. Maybe we can say that they were doing a bit of maintenance on the aircraft and were checking different systems out. Not completely accurate, but it gives a reasoning behind it. Here's the avionic bay cover going in place. I opted to leave the avionic bay components, the actual avionics, out because I was going to have it closed, and I've seen some stories of some not so good fitment if that piece is in and you try to close the bay. Here are all of the transparencies getting popped into place. They were all masked off just using Tamiya's standard masking tape, and there, as you can see, the nose wheel was masked off using a little bit of foam. With that being done, the aircraft is pretty much ready for primer. All we have to do now is get the tip tanks glued on, and these look very, very cool. The first color that's going to be going down on the aircraft is a Vallejo Model Air blue-gray. This is the most accurate color that I can find to the gray color that the late service CF-104s sported. Some of you might notice that I'm not doing my usual black basing technique, and that's because after looking at reference pictures of CF-104s, looking at the very few reference pictures of CF-104s in this two-tone camo, the paint was very, very patchy and very faded, and similar to like US Navy F-18s, the ground crews would paint over panel lines and sections of paint, like corroded paint, with lighter colors of paint, which created a super patchy effect, and it was just really cool looking. So what I'm doing here is kind of a mottling effect, and I'm going to do that with a few different colors, and then when I go over it with the uniform coating of the blue-gray, some of those colors will very faintly shine through and create a very patchy and kind of run-down looking effect, which is exactly what I was going for. Here's that first model layer all put down. It looks really, really cool. The CF-104 is sporting the two-tone camo. That's my favorite scheme that the CF-104s were in. It's such a cool looking scheme. Just the kind of almost like a World War II style camouflage with just the green and the gray and then the really light colored underside. It's beautiful and I absolutely love it. Here, as you can see now, I'm spraying down a blue color. I believe this is an ultramarine blue. Can't remember the paint manufacturer, so I do apologize about that. But it was a very deep blue. It was like an ultramarine kind of blue. And this is also being modeled down the same way that the blue-gray was, but just not nearly as much. The final color to be modeled down is a Vallejo Model Air white-gray. That's what it's called, it's just white-gray. And that's the color that I ended up using on the lower surfaces of the aircraft. It was a little bit too light of a color, but my plan was to tone it down with a black wash, and it worked perfectly. So in real life it is a little more gray. It's probably closer to like a very light gull gray or something similar, but with that being said, in some reference pictures it does look more white than gray. It just depends on how the light's hitting it, so either or would work and it would still look fantastic. At this point now it's all finished up and we can go ahead and start blending it back in with the blue-gray color. Doing this very, very slowly, almost modeling this blue-gray on again, choosing some parts to be lighter and some parts to be darker, etc., etc., and just really trying to take my time with it and make sure that I'm being cautious not to completely drown out the paint colors underneath. Here's that paint all finished up. It looks very, very good, and I am incredibly happy with the result. It is definitely the best modeling I've done to date, and probably some of the best general painting I've done to date. I was really happy with how it came out. Moving on to the green now. The base color is going to be a standard dark green color, same one that I used on my Spitfire that I built a few months back. I'm not really going to show you much of this at all because with the green I just repeated the process that I did with the gray, and I showed you quite a bit of that. And I don't want to bore you with the same painting techniques over and over again. But it came out just as good as the gray, and I was very happy with it. At this point now we can move on to the lower surfaces of the aircraft. As said before, this was sprayed up in the white-gray color using the exact same modeling technique that was used on the upper surfaces, except this time the white is the only color that's going to be used. The white came out a little bit more patchy than I would have liked it to. You know, on the lower surfaces of the aircraft, it doesn't see the sun nearly as much as the upper surfaces of the aircraft do, so it's not going to get nearly as faded. But, like I said earlier, the wash kind of drowned a little bit of that out, and it worked out. Here's that paint all finished up. There you can see what I mean by patchy. It kind of looked like a leopard print, just with the lighter spots and the darker spots, but it gets drowned out like I've said a few times before. Moving on to the hot section of the aircraft now. This was painted up in a Vallejo white aluminum color. This is a pretty standard process, just a uniform coating of the silver color, or the aluminum color. There was a little bit of overspray in the fuselage after I was finished up with this, but we got it touched up and it wasn't a problem at all. Here's the radome going in place. There, as you can see, I put some fishing weights in there. The aircraft literally cannot be a tail sitter because of the way that it's landing gear oriented, so I honestly have no idea why I did that. But I did it, so, you know, there's that. The reason I left the radome off for so long is because I initially thought that the entire radome itself was black, but it actually gets masked off. There's about a centimeter of space where the camo continues on before you get to the black section, so I left that off thinking that I was saving myself some time and saving myself some masking, but I ended up having to do masking anyway because there was a little bit of paint that needed to go on it. As said earlier, the CF-104's paint was similar to kind of Navy F-18 paint in the sense that ground crew would paint over the panel lines and like different sections of paint with a lighter color or darker color, depending on what they had on hand, to repair the paint and stop corrosion and things like that. So here you can see me trying to replicate that. The PSI of the airbrush was at 20. It's way too much for this, so you can see here it ended up being too fat. It was like way too noticeable, and the color was a little off. So I end up spraying over this completely and starting again, and the second time around it looked way better. Here you can see I replicated that technique on the gray. It wasn't as noticeable on the gray because the colors were very similar, but still looked really cool. CF-104s featured this red band around the back of the fuselage, and that's kind of like the danger marker. If you walk past that when the engine's running, not going to end well for you. It comes as decals in the kit, like it comes as 2 or 3 small strips of red. I opted just to paint it because I already had the airbrush out, and it looks a little bit better with the paint. Here's that nose wheel strut put in place. Looks very, very good. It's nice to note there too, I don't know if you noticed, but there's small little holes in one of the pieces of strut for weight saving. I didn't drill those out. Those were molded holes, and there wasn't a single bit of flash on them, which is incredibly impressive. Here are the landing gear doors going in place. I didn't realize till after. I probably should have painted the inside of the landing gear doors green to match the rest of the wheel well, but nonetheless, you can't really see them very well. So here, as you can see, the aircraft was gloss coated, and now I'm going to put a wash over the entire aircraft. The panel lines on the model weren't super deep, they were pretty shallow, so basically all of the wash wiped up out of the panel lines, and I kind of wasted my time by doing this on the upper surfaces, but on the lower surfaces it stuck a little better because the paint, there's less layers of paint, and it's a bit of a lighter color, so it dulled everything down anyway. While the wash dries, we can go ahead and assemble the drop tanks. These are made up of 3 pieces, top half, bottom half, and that little vertical fin right there. These are painted up in the same kind of scheme as the actual aircraft. The bottom half of them is white and the top half has the camo, which is pretty cool. And after they were all painted up, I did a little bit of weathering just to show some fuel leaks and everything like that. There's you just saw the wash was wiped away, and I did some streaking on the bottom of the aircraft to show some oil leaks and hydraulic leaks and things like that. And there you just saw the candy cane looking pitot tube going in place. At this point now in the build, we're really on the home straight. Here you can see me painting up some red for some lights to go in the bottom of the aircraft. And after that, all that's left to do is paint the burner can, and then this one is finished up. So the final part of this build is going to be the exhaust can, or the exhaust or the burner can, for the J79 engine that the CF-104 used. Painting up jet engine exhausts is something that I'm still not completely comfortable with, and I'm still trying to find a good technique to do it. So if anybody has any pointers or tips or anything like that, please do let me know in the comments. I'd love to read them and have some new ideas for different things that I can try. But here's what I'm going to do for this one. Initially, I sprayed it up in a white aluminum color, and then here, as you can see, I covered the whole thing in a wash. I matte coated it and then covered it in a wash. And the reason behind that was because the matte coat would help the wash stick better, and I wasn't planning on wiping it off. The wash gives it a dirty, burnt effect. Now here you can see I'm taking a blue marker, and I'm just kind of coloring over different sections, and then I'm going to blend that blue marker in, and it kind of gives like a burnt kind of like heat burnt effect after it's blended in, and if it hits it at certain light, you can see it, and it looks pretty cool. So with that being finished up, all that's left to do is get the landing lights glued onto the main wheel doors, get the burner can cemented onto the aircraft, and that finishes up a very exciting way to kick off 2026. If you stuck around this far into the video, thank you very, very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. I am extremely happy to have this kit in my collection. The CF-104 has long been my favorite Cold War fighter, and me being Canadian, this kit definitely has a bit of a special place in my heart. So yeah, thank you very, very much for watching, and enjoy the final photos. We'll see you next time.